Hey, 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 hey.
It's about to get crazy. It's about to go down. It's about to get crazy. It's gonna be loud. This is our house. We do what we wanna. We'll blow the roof out. Everybody's coming. It's about to get crazy. It's about to go down. It's about to go down.
You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. Life is not easy. Life isn't fair. It never was, and it never will be. A good life takes grit, because the best things in life come from hard work, sacrifice, resolve, determination, and perseverance. Because grit means never quitting. It means coming back time and time again until you succeed. So on this show, we talk hunting, we talk outdoors, we talk conservation, we talk family and life. We talk fitness, and we talk strength of body, strength of mind, and strength of character. Prioritize who you are and who you want to be. Get gritty, because life isn't fair, and a little grit can make all the difference. Yes, sir.
And I'm sitting here with Brian Cole.
You're hijacking my show, brother.
Sorry.
I hear that's how you roll.
No, I like to listen and then interject my intelligence when it's necessary.
I love Ty. You have been a friend of mine for, I don't know, how long has it been now? Probably 5 years or more.
5+ years.
Yeah.
Back when both of us were nobodies.
Yeah, still
I'm
are.
still a nobody.
But, we try.
Yeah.
We
try hard.
Do things that make a difference. We did a hike today. Backcountry hunters and anglers hike here at Big Sky.
Hashtag hike to hunt.
Hike to hunt. And how many people were there?
I think there was like 25.
Yeah.
I counted in the picture.
Which wasn't too bad, since we kind of late notice threw it out there. And considering how many beer drinking parties were available last night.
Yeah.
And the hike was at 7 a.m.
Which
was pretty good turnout.
Which I regretted last night.
Yeah.
I really wish I'd have made that like 7:30, 8-ish.
You had a few drinks, huh?
I didn't. Actually, I'm here with my Josh and my daughter Allie and my 2 grandsons. And so the kids really had to eat, So when we got done with the booth last night, we busted back to camp and made dinner. And I brought a small amount of whiskey with me so that I wouldn't drink a bunch of whiskey. And I looked at it last night. I had the bottle in my hand, and I was looking at it, and I'm like, Brian was talking smack, and he was talking about racing. So this is not a performance enhancer.
Yeah.
So I thought, the off chance that we really do race up the hill, I want to be at my optimal best.
So I encouraged you to
be. You were a positive influence on me.
Thank you. I try.
I know you do.
So Ty's with Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. What's your role there?
I'm the chapter coordinator. My role's kind of evolving. Mm-hmm. So when I started out in 2015, I was the chapter coordinator for 17 chapters. And over the last 3 years, we've grown in membership, grown in funding, and we've grown in numbers of chapters. And so we've managed to hire some more coordinators. And we went from, I think when I started, we had 5 employees.
Yeah.
5-6 employees. We now have 20, 28, 29.
Wow.
And so as we grow and as we get more members and more chapters, we get more coordinators. They take chapters off my plate. And so right now my role is evolving from being chapter coordinator just overall to I'm responsible for all new chapter creation. Mm-hmm. And then I still have a handful of chapters. I'm still supporting Alaska, British Columbia, Alberta, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Missouri. I
remember sitting down with you probably 3 years ago or more. And I was hearing, I followed you through Born to Raise Outdoors. Big fan of all the stuff you guys did early on, and still a big fan. And watched you guys kill elk and just be raw and real and you were very relatable, and you grew up in my backyard there in Oregon, and hunting Roosevelt elk and so on. And so as I followed you along, and then I knew you did a lot of conservation work and work with in Oregon with Oregon
Hunters Association.
Hunters Association.
That's where I started my conservation career.
So you were involved with them and supporting them, and then right about the time we were hanging out and getting to know each other, you were making that switch to work for BHA.
Yeah.
And then you moved out to Montana, and you've been with BHA for how long now?
3 years.
3 years.
Yeah.
So I remember having you on the podcast and being highly skeptical of BHA and what you were doing with BHA. Mm-hmm. And me and you had a lot of private conversations because there's a lot of comments made about it being a green decoy and you know, that the motives behind the organization are not in line with sportsmen and hunting and stuff like that. And so you and I had some in-depth conversations early on where we talked about those things and kind of hashed them out. The issue still comes up and has come up in recent months as well. So that
green decoy that you talk about, that, had just surfaced when I just started with BHA in 2015.
And for those that aren't familiar with it, can you explain that?
So Green Decoy it's a website, and it's put together by a lobbying group. I'm gonna have to look up the guy's name. I've forgotten his name, but the Green Decoy is basically a website toting to be reporting on conservation organizations that pretend to be hunting and conservation organizations when they're actually really environmental groups. And so they're trying to put a spin on the work that we do and saying that we're not really hunters and we're not really anglers and we're not really, conservationists, but we're actually environmentalists.
Right.
And they're trying to put that spin on there so that they're trying to discredit us.
Yep.
Right.
And who's they?
Robert Bierman. I'm gonna look his name up because I'm gonna get it wrong, but I believe it's Robert Bierman. But okay, I'm gonna read from an email that was just sent by the Montana chapter. His name's Richard Berman, dubbed Dr. Evil by 60 Minutes. He is an oil and gas lawyer.
Okay.
And a lobbyist. The Green Decoys is coordinated and put together by himself and one other gentleman who I'm not sure what his name is, but so essentially he's running a smear campaign against BHA right now. Mm-hmm. This is to discredit our work that we do and some of the work that we do in protecting some of the special places. Example, Boundary Waters Canoe Wilderness Area. A foreign mining company came in, wanted to open a sulfide mine for copper at the headwaters of the Boundary Waters.
Yeah.
And so we would be tasked with, maintaining the cleanliness of that water that's flowing into these national treasure, right? That's some of the work that we do. BHA is probably one of the largest conservation organizations that work specifically on those issues. And so we're like one of the primary targets.
It's bound to happen. If you're going to go up against oil and gas lobbyists, if you're going to go up against people who are trying to get their hands on these vast tracts, these 640 million acres of public lands, which represent a huge amount of wealth, if you're going to go up against those groups, they're going to fight dirty. They're going to have dirty plays. They're going to do things, coordinated efforts to smear and to discredit anyone who's going to go up against them. It's not going to be a pretty fight. It's going to be ugly.
Yep.
So the fact that they're out there and this Green Decoy organization has built this platform and it's headed by that group of people is not a surprise. Mm-hmm. Nor is it a surprise that they lie about things to discredit, organizations like BHA. The thing is, Ty, we were talking about this, it kind of works sometimes against our own community. Mm-hmm. Because our own community, they're so against the environmentalist groups. Right. They hold conservative values.
Well, here's the issue with environmentalists and coming from the logging community. I totally understand, and I get the I get where people, automatically throw up this wall when you start talking about, and I term it conservation. Folks twist that a little bit. But when you talk about an environmentalist, and especially in the logging community, that means somebody who just doesn't want you to log, right? Mm-hmm. That means somebody who's going to fight against you as a logger, right? And they'll do everything they can, and part of it
it's an ideology. Mm-hmm. It's not really something that makes sense or is logical or is where you agree or negotiate what makes sense long term for doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people for the greatest period of time. Rather, it's an ideology that is like, we should never log ever, and it's immoral to do so, and they're stuck on that so hard that they can't listen to reason or any kind of logic.
Correct. And they'll use something that is, for the general populace meaninless, like a spotted frog or a endangered butterfly or something like that,
Yeah.
And so they use that to accomplish their goal.
And that's your kind of stereotypical environmentalist.
Right. That's your stereotypical, So, and that's not what we do.
Right.
At all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And we don't use litigation. We use working groups, we use policy, and we get involved and we sit at the table with everybody. That's
all the
involved.
players.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so that in a nutshell is what the green decoy thing is they're calling us radical environmentalists and saying that we don't hunt and fish. I'm here to tell you that the circles that surround what we do and are part of what we do are some of the most efficient, badass hunters and fishermen on the planet. When
you look around at the people, even here at Big Sky, people that support backcountry hunters and their efforts, they're, including yourself, are dedicated to the outdoors and preserving that and our hunting heritage and managing wildlife. It's easy for me being knowing you as I do and others to just understand and just be like, no, this is all a bunch of lies. But it's hard for someone on the outside just looking in who's not familiar with it all. If you just see that other side of the argument from the green decoy side, you can see it can seem like BHA is on the wrong side.
Right.
But we also talked about this the other day, that even within our own community and among our own friends, there's people who are like, yeah, I don't like what BHA is doing. I don't like what they've done. And so, they've partnered with this guy or with this group. And so I'm not going to get involved. And,
so what we were talking about coming off the hill was the fact that, one of the guys on the hike, I don't remember who it was, but when we're coming off the hill, he's new to BHA, and he's from, I believe he was with Wisconsin or Michigan. And he was coming off the hill, and he's like, I don't understand why, the hikers, the general hiker, they don't get more involved and fight for our public lands and fight for, the access. Because right now, the current immediate attack right now is Senator Lee and his, outspoken desire to transfer federal lands to state. And so that, that's a huge...
It's just a plan for privatization.
Yeah, it's a plan for privatization. We can go into detail on that if you want, but which I think is very important to explain to people.
Which I've kind of beat on quite a bit.
Have you been beating that one? But, he was bringing up the point, well, why don't the hikers get more involved?
Or the paddlers or the kayakers.
All other outdoor recreation, right? Because, to be honest with you, they outnumber us probably 10 to 1. I mean, in the grand scheme of things. And so the fact is that we're actually reaching out to those people. We recognize that if we don't get them to the table with us, they don't have to agree with hunting. They don't have to be hunters. They don't have to be fishermen. But it's our job to not only educate them on what we do properly from us, and not from something that they see on social media, but to also educate them about what's at stake in the public lands and waters and the very things that they hold so dear. We have all that in common. And so when we sit down at the table and work with and have these conversations with somebody like Patagonia, people lose their shit. Like, Patagonia's anti-hunting. Patagonia, this, that. They're a radical environmentalist, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to tell you that although they don't agree with everything that we do, or, grizzly bear thing was a prime example. They spoke out against the grizzly bear hunt in Wyoming. That's fine. We don't agree with that. We agree with proper state management of our wildlife. Mm-hmm. And if it's grizzly bear hunt is warranted, then great.
Right.
But there are other things that we do agree on. Like, we want to keep our public lands in public hands, right?
Yes. So
we want to sit at the table with those people. We need their help, and we need to be holding hands on that particular subject. And so that's something the BHA is really good about, and we recognize. And people take that and twist it like, oh, because we're sitting at the table with these people and we agree on an issue and we want to move forward and work with them on this issue, that now we're them or we're like them.
Yep.
And it's not the facts.
Right. I talked to Randy Newberg yesterday. I was on his podcast, Hunt Talk Radio, Randy Newberg Unfiltered, which I thoroughly enjoy. And Randy was saying, he was like, I was saying, look, if someone is pro public lands and they love wild animals and they love grizzly bear, right? We don't have to agree maybe on how they're managed and all that kind of stuff. But if they're pro animal, pro wild places, pro public lands, I'm like, okay, that's a foundation that we can build from there. And hopefully over time, we can come to agree on other things. But I have faith in human beings who love wild places and wild animals and who will fight for those things. So the folks at Patagonia, I understand when they are anti-hunting, how much it bothers us. Mm-hmm. But I also appreciate that they love wild animals like they do, and that their heart is in the place of, hey, I want to preserve these bears. And we're the same. It's a matter of how it's done that we don't quite, match up on. But as far as them being good or bad people, I mean, I feel like, hey, that's something we can build from. And I have faith in people like that they will somehow, someday, or us even, find a way to work things out.
Right.
Because we're starting from a place of we both love the same thing. We just aren't sure. We just don't agree on how it should be managed. But when the opposing forces don't love the same thing, they love new buildings, they love extraction, they love raping the places that we love, and they don't mind damaging watersheds, or they don't mind eliminating migration corridors and things like that in the name of progress and enterprise. Those people, I don't have faith in them that we can come to some sort of agreement or understanding down the road. So, and if you, like Randy said, if you deal with if you're sitting there looking for someone who's going to agree with you on everything, he's like, you're going to be a party of one.
Yep.
That's it.
I nailed it.
You're a party
totally
of one.
Nailed it. Right.
And so it's like, you have to, at some point, you have to say, where can we meet on common ground, and then build from there. And that's tough. That's tough for people to do when, let's say, they don't agree with you on something like abortion. It gets very, very sticky because, they agree with me here. And there are some places that are a line in the sand for some people. Right. And I get that. And that might be one of them. But I feel like at some point you have to compromise with these different people and find common ground, and then build from that. And we need allies, like you said. When it comes to public lands, we need all those bikers and hikers and paddlers, and without them, we as hunters, we're not enough.
Yeah,
we're not enough.
We're not. And this.
So BHA gets criticized among some other things, and I'm just like, look, nobody's perfect. NRA gets criticized. I mean, and I get it because they do some things, and I'm like, you guys are an embarrassment. But at the same time, I still support NRA because they fight for my Second Amendment rights. We don't agree on all these other issues, but we do agree on that. And so,
if you're married, you live in a household with somebody you you love, right? But you don't agree with, right? All the time. Like my own wife and I do not agree with everything all the time.
In my house, it's more like a dictatorship, and so she does what I say. It's so not true.
You're so full of it.
But
I heard you talking smack on the hill today. I'm hoping to share that with her.
Seriously, there is a you've got to compromise at some level and work through things. So
here, before you go there, there's a point. I'd like to reiterate a point to what you're saying.
Sure.
And that is back in like 90, the early to mid 90s in Oregon when logging on public lands really took a nosedive. And that was big in part by the environmentalist groups who wanted to stop it on public lands. The big part of the problem was, number one, they didn't want to listen to anybody else either. Like they dug their heels in. And it was their way or the highway. And they used the system to win. They were very smart about it. The other side, industry side, didn't want to sit at the table with them and refuse to work, at the table to try to find a solution. Right? So logging's a funny thing, right? You've got one of the most renewable resources on the planet. And we want to utilize that. But we want to be smart about it. So why can't we figure out how to utilize that and make industry side happy, make the environmental side happy, come together in the middle? Yeah, we have to change the things that we've been doing for the last 100 years, which is probably a good thing, right?
Right.
For a lot of reasons. So if the industry side would have given a little, and the environmental side would have given a little, and met somewhere in the middle, then logging would not have taken the giant nosedive on public lands that it did. And that's where we're at right now with hunting and our public lands and fishing. Like, if we don't come to the table with the folks that don't necessarily agree with everything that we're doing, but they have a big play in the game, a big stake in the game, we're not going to get anything that we want.
Yeah.
So we have to lose that mindset that our way is the only way, and that we dig our heels in and don't listen to the other side and don't try to understand where they're coming from and don't sit at the table. That has been history. Like, that is what we have done.
Yeah.
We have to change that mindset.
When we were talking, as we were coming down the hill from the hike today, we were talking about how to approach this and with people, there were a lot of hikers who came up to me and said, I just didn't know about a lot of these things until I started listening to this or Randy Newberg or Gritty Bowman. They're like, and now I see public lands differently, and I realize there's a fight to be had, and they want to be involved. And one of the things that we talked about was, I feel, Ty, that you have to help people value wild lands, wild places and animals. And if they don't, if they value, so you were talking about, well, let's preserve this and take care of that, and let's do conservation here. And all I was thinking was, from the outside looking in, it just looks like you're anti-oil and gas, you're anti-progress, you're anti-economic growth. You just want everything to be all hippie and live in a van down by the river, right? I mean,
yep, for sure.
And that's kind of the thing that people hear.
Out of context, yes.
Yeah, and I feel like, okay, we as the hunting community should do more to help others see the value in nature being nature.
Well, even in the hunting community, we need to understand that, because there's many folks in the hunting community that feel like we should put more focus on extractive industry,
right,
whatever it may be, than our public lands and waters and hunting and fishing.
So we talked about that a little bit, and there are dollars generated from nature being nature, just in terms of financial and economic growth, that seems to be ignored all the time, ignored or overlooked. And it's like, well, it's just sitting there, and we have to take this big financial loss on all this land.
Which is what Senator Lee's, that's his point.
Exactly. Senator Lee is sort of like,
he basically said our public lands are useless to the general public. Our national parks are treasures, but outside of that, the rest of our public lands are useless.
Yep. they're just useless, and there's no economic value there, and we have to take this big, huge financial hit in order to leave them the way they are, and it's not the best use of those lands. From what research I've done, that's a big misrepresentation of the facts, because the lands just being what they are, there's tons of money generating from those public lands just being nature, in terms of hunting dollars, in terms of recreation and outdoor activities. And so let's talk about some of those numbers. And I have some here, because the question that comes up in the state of Utah is, what happens in the state of Utah if 60% of that state, which is now federally managed public lands collectively owned by all Americans, if that becomes state trust lands, then it starts being used for oil and gas. Does that generate greater economic income? Not just oil and gas, but other things too. Does that generate more money than it does in its current state being nature?
That's a really good question. So there's some studies, and you have those numbers at hand. The value in that public lands, and what we're doing basically is comparing outdoor recreation, which encompasses everything, hunting, fishing, angling. Those two the same things. Hunting and, hiking and backpacking and camping and paddling and, boating and ziplining, all the things that, whatever it is that everybody does on public lands.
Yep.
You're comparing that with extractive industry. Just industry.
Yes.
Logging, mining, gas, oil, all of that. The outdoor recreation pumps more into the U.S. economy by itself than all extractive industry combined. And I'm pretty sure you have those numbers right there.
Yeah. It says, I have this here from the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership, TRCP. Today, America's public land system is the envy of the world, part of what makes our nation unique. I've quoted this before. Every American, regardless of class, economic status, and so on, can hike, bike, camp, fish, paddle, so forth, on 640 million acres that we collectively own. So here's the deal. These lands form the backbone of the $887 billion outdoor recreation economy, employing more than 7 million people and generating more than $100 billion in tax revenues every year, thanks to the excise taxes and license fees that all hunters and anglers pay. America boasts the best managed fish and wildlife in the world.
That to me kind of speaks in volumes, right?
Right.
But that is something that nobody ever talks about.
Yeah, I feel like those dollars are so huge. And when Senator Mike Lee says these lands are sitting there not doing anything, it's not a true assessment of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's not true at all. And so if he looks at that and still insists on it not generating income, what he's saying is, to me, is these lands are generating income for all Americans and the U.S. economy and small business owners, and it's benefiting the world greatly. Plus, these lands are being utilized in a renewable way for the greatest good, for the greatest period of time, for the greatest number of people. He's saying he wants to trade all that in to support private ownership among a few people who will benefit directly from extraction and other activities on the land instead. Mm-hmm. That's what it's effectively. That's what his agenda is. It's part of his platform. Is, hey, let's trade all that stuff in right now that is working so well in terms of generating income for, like you said, the U.S. economy. Let's swap it out for one that really helps
annually without
with that just being nature.
Yeah.
And let's swap that out for this other model that helps, my buddies in rich places. That's I can't help but see it for that, because that's what it is.
Yeah. Because
I'm just saying, stop encroaching on the last 25% that remains. I just don't feel like it's ethical for humans to take up more than 75. It's like, at what point do you draw the line? Is it like, okay, well, let's cut that 600 million in half. Oh, so animals get 1 out of every 10 acres. Do you really think that the species that we have left can thrive in populations that are sustainable long term for the next 200, 300, 400 years if we sit here and like wipe out the other like half of what's left? The grizzly bears are just barely on the return.
Right.
There are other animals that are on the verge of extinction all over the United States. And you're saying, well, let's just take those, and they're thriving on public land. Mm-hmm. They're not thriving in New York City. They're not doing it in. There are animals, I've said this before, that win the lottery when civilization rolls in. But there's a greater number of animals that die when civilization takes hold. I mean, it just seems like a no-brainer to me to leave the land alone, let it generate all that income for all Americans. Have it be there 100 years, 200, 500 years.
Well, it's not just the animals. I mean, it's us. We're animals too, but it's us. Like, we have to have a place
clean
to
water.
Go. We have to have clean water, and that's another thing. Like BHA is one of our, it's one of our buckets is clean water and clean air, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We all need that. We all have to have that, and it's a big deal. And what happens when the public lands that we have that produces a lot of the clean water that we consume, what happens when that's privatized?
Right.
You thought you were paying a lot for gas, Yeah.
With
that rung a bell with me. I think it was last year. I was at the Western Hunt Expo, and I had left my water bottle. I usually take a water bottle and fill it at a drinking fountain. I'd left it. I had to go buy a bottle of water. I paid $4 for 16 ounces of water. It's like $3 and some change. It was just shy of $4, which is about what you pay for a gallon of gas. So for 16 ounces, I don't need a gallon of gas. I don't have to have a gallon of gas.
Yeah.
But I have to have
clean
water.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it really, really struck a chord with me because I'm like, yeah, you preach it or whatever. But it really hit home with me when I paid almost more for 16 ounces of water than you would a gallon of gas.
Yeah.
And I thought, what happens when it's private? Like, this is all owned by somebody else, and they know this.
There's another fact, too, that gets overlooked in the midst of all of this and I'd be curious what that number is off of the state of Utah, but Shane Mahoney has mentioned this, where there's something like 300 million pounds of white-tailed deer meat harvested and consumed in the United States every year. And white-tailed deer aren't the best example because they live in like cities, white-tailed deer. They're like rats.
They are like rats.
They can thrive in metropolis type areas. But you do have other species like elk and moose and even bear, all the other big game species that contribute as well. That 300 million is just a number to show you how much meat is being consumed from an organic standpoint that's being harvested. You don't have cattle running a field. You don't have to fence an area. You don't have to bring in corn to augment this food. These animals live wild, and then hunters pay money to go and get them and bring this meat home and eat healthy meat. And so there's this value there that is always overlooked, which is the protein value that's walking around out there that feeds a significant portion of our population. And, is it going to replace agriculture and ranching? No. But it's certainly a large enough number that it should be taken into account. And that's what Shane Mahoney's doing with his projects that he's been working on. But it's always overlooked. It's always kind of ignored. Like it's not a thing, but it is. I don't know how many hunters in Utah, and I'd like to figure this out. How many hunters, both resident and non-resident, harvest, and how many pounds of meat flow out of Utah every year in a very natural and healthy way.
Right.
So I think it's more complex, but at the end of the day, for my part, I just feel like it's time for humans to draw a line in the sand and be like, we get 75% because we've already taken it and it's hard to get that back. But the other 25%, That's for wild places. Leave it alone. Leave it the hell alone.
Well, the beauty of that is it's still ours. Like, we own it and we're a part of it and we engage it, and we can engage
American as
any
hell.
It is. It's what formed this country. It's why we came here from the very beginning, right?
Oh, yeah. And it's such a blessing because you're rich. Even if you have nothing, you own all those lands.
Yeah.
I think when you grow up out west, because I see a lot of Eastern hunters appreciate it seemingly more than some of the Western guys, like friends of mine who just kind of take for granted that these vast tracts of public land are just going to be there.
Yeah.
It's like, no. Could be completely gone. Your kids and your grandkids could have a totally different life. Go back east for a while. Pay $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 for a tiny lease so you can go out on some wilderness area and do something. And you start to appreciate what we have here.
The gentleman that was asking about the hikers, he also brought up the fact that to hunt, he pays for a lease of $4,000 a year.
Yeah,
to be able to hunt whitetails.
Yeah, someone wrote in to me, and my brother made a comment on one of the podcasts.
He's from Kansas,
and he said something like, Brent said something. Yeah, it's like $400 to go hunt deer, and the guy wrote in and was like, I don't know what planet your brother's living on. It's more like $5,000, $4,000 for a small lease to hunt deer during the season.
Yeah,
that's an expensive way
you have to shoot a lot of whitetails.
Yeah, yeah. So
And so that's the beauty of it. Like this 25% that we have left, we want to keep ours. We still get to use it.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge, and that's the big challenge about our public lands is it's managed. It's a big pie. I always refer to it as a big pie. Mm-hmm. And everybody wants their little piece of it. We have the mountain bikers here this weekend at Total Archery Challenge, literally riding by us right now, checking things out on his bike, right?
Yep.
Those guys want their piece. We have the motorized, OHV guys. They want their piece.
Yep.
We have the backcountry people, the people that want to get away from all that. They want their piece. We have the loggers and the coal miners and, the oil and gas, and they all want their piece. Mm-hmm. So federal lands, that's why it's such a challenge for people to understand is, they're not doing it what I want. Well, they are. It's just not as much as you want because there's 20 other user groups that want their little piece of it too.
Yeah.
So you have to come to the table. You have to realize that. And like you said, it's such a complex issue. People need to realize that it's not just you.
Yeah.
It's your neighbor and your neighbor's neighbor that also want their little piece of this.
Right.
If it's state lands, none of us get a say in what happens.
Totally.
Other than through the vote. And it's managed completely different. It's managed only for economy and only for financial, and you don't get a say in how that looks or what that means.
Absolutely.
And some of the figures I wanted to bring up about your point earlier, and why I said history is there's a precedent set about when federal lands are transferred to state. So when each state, there's also a misconception about state wants their land back.
Right.
Well, it wasn't state land to begin with.
No.
It was federal land to begin with. It was granted to the state. The state at conception said, this is what we want for state lands. The rest can be federal, right? And so whatever the state started with, that's what they get. And if you look at it, a lot of the federal public lands, they're pretty rugged. It's a pretty rugged country, most of it.
Yeah.
It's stuff that you're, for the most part, not going to run cattle. You're not going to build houses or condos. Like, it's pretty legit country for the most part. So the state's got some of the prime stuff. The homesteaders got the really prime stuff. And then whatever's left over, the feds kept. The precedent that I'm talking about is got some examples. And these are figures from 2014. They probably haven't changed a lot. But examples are Oregon. Started out with 3.4 million acres of state land. They now have 760,000 left.
Right.
So they sold off,
2
point some million acres. They liquidated.
Yep. I talked about this in a recent show.
Did you?
Yeah. It's like somewhere between basically 30 or 35% to 90% of every state West, all their public land, they've sold off somewhere between 35 and 90%, with most of them being closer to all of it.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
Nevada started out with 2.7 million.
They're the biggest travesty.
They have 3,000 acres left. And they're the ones driving the bus to want more federal land transferred to the state.
Yep.
It's like, wait a minute. You sold everything that you had before. Now what?
Yep.
What are you going to do with it?
Right. No, that's why, as much as I would like to put power in the hands of the states and support them in how they use their lands, they haven't demonstrated that kind of level of ability to do so responsibly.
Yeah.
So
no, precedent has definitely been set.
yeah.
So I guess at the end of the day, like, we all need to open our minds, think about somebody else's take and that,
Yep.
the mountain bikers and their little piece of the pie. And, we need to think about how this is balanced.
Yeah.
And know that we're not going to get everything that we want. But at the end of the day, if we can sit at that table and understand and listen to somebody else's,
Have a little open mind.
somebody else's take on our public lands and why they're managed the way they're managed, we'll get to keep them.
Yeah. I agree.
Which is way more important than.
Where can people go to sign up to be part of BHA?
It's backcountryhunters.org is our website.
And it costs not much.
It's $25 for an annual membership, individual annual membership. And, you'll get a annual quarterly magazine.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're always sending out information, trying to educate our members, trying to keep them up to speed. We send out a lot of, action alerts. Example, like when Senator Lee made the statements, public comments that he made about liquidating our public lands.
Mm-hmm.
We flooded our members with information on this and encouraged them to reach out and on social media specifically and let him know that we're not okay with this and we're not going to sit by and let this happen.
And that's what's great too, is I know we're all busy and we all have things going on, yet we care about these issues. And so when you team up with Backcountry Hunters or some of the other organizations fighting for public lands, when you team up like that, you're able to, you assist us in this fight. You help us come together, have a unified voice. You help us send letters and communications back to each of the representatives. You make it a lot easier to do this outreach. And so,
we really help you with knowing who your representative is, giving you their contact information.
And there's how many chapters now? How many states?
We have 29 chapters in 34 states and 2 Canadian provinces.
Yeah.
Working on the Yukon.
A little at a time. Getting there a little bit at a time. That's
I'm
awesome.
excited about that.
Yeah.
So, actually, I spoke a little bit about some of the new chapters coming on, new states that we're working on. And Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky we're just now starting work to form chapters in those states and the Yukon, like I was just saying.
Yep.
And so if you live in any of those states, shoot me an email. We're working on starting a chapters in each of those. It's just ty@backcountryhunters.org.
Yep.
But love to have your help. We're trying to build this public land army. It's important to everybody.
Yep, it is. Ty, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks
Appreciate
for having
brother.
me, Brian.
And
it's been a while.
Yeah, it has. Keep doing our thing, and you can check out Ty's podcast, Shooting the Bull. You're on iTunes and all the places podcasts
Stitcher.
can be found.
We just launched a website too.
Nice.
We're like growing up.
That's awesome.
We're like your illegitimate little stepbrother.
So Ty does a little podcast as well, and a little video. You have a YouTube channel?
We have a YouTube channel. It's in its infancy stages. You're
growing.
It's your fault that I do a podcast.
Yeah, I'm all about people filming their stuff and spreading message. Everybody has their circle of influence, and the more of us that are out here engaged, proactively sharing the things that are important to us, I just think that's where it's at. It's
Absolutely.
not one person that just reaches. It's not Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, that's great, but it typically is thousands and thousands of individuals that make the difference.
Yep.
Over time. So we need everyone involved.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, brother.
I love what you do. Thank you.
Yep. You too.
Cheers.
Stay gritty.
Stay gritty.
Despite our ever-changing, ever-indignant world with its growing ignorance of and indifference to the ways of the wild, I remain a predator, pitying those who revel in artificiality and synthetic success while regarding me and my kind as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood. I stalk a real world of dark wood and tall grass stirred by a restless wind blowing across sunlit water and beneath star-strewn sky. And on those occasions when I choose to kill, to claim some small part of nature's bounty for my own, I do so by choice, quickly, with the learned efficiency of a skilled hunter. Further, in my heart and mind, I know the truth and make no apologies for my actions or my place in time. Others around me may opt to eat only plants, nuts, and fruits. Still others may employ faceless strangers to procure their meats, their leather, their feathers, and all those niceties and necessities of life. Such is their right, of course, and I wish them well. All I ask in return is no one begrudge me, and all of us who may answer the primordial stirrings within our hunter souls, my right to do some of these things myself. What you just heard is a quote from M.R. James. We truly live in a world that is largely ignorant and indifferent to the ways of the wild. And although some regard us as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood, we have the opportunity to change the way these people view the hunter and the hunt. We can share our experiences and nature's bounty with those who employ these faceless strangers. And by so doing, we make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the wild animals in the wild places we care so deeply about. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting and the outdoors. Our wild animals and our wild places depend on it.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to The Gritty Bowman.
Gritty Bowman.